Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Beneath the Howling Moon. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read 4 by You Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Unquiet Town. The rusted hinges of the iron gate groaned in protest as Sarah pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the dying light, swirling around her like unwelcome phantoms. Hollow Creek, the town etched into her childhood memories, looked less like a haven and more like a mausoleum. The once vibrant main street wore a desolate air. Boarded-up shops with peeling paint stared back at her like vacant eyes. A lone tumbleweed, skittered across the cracked asphalt. Unease prickled at Sarah's skin. It wasn't just the desolate town square, though that certainly contributed. It was the atmosphere, a suffocating silence, broken only by the rasping of her own breath. The townsfolk, usually bustling about their day, seemed to have vanished. Or were they watching her from behind drawn curtains, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear? Sarah wasn't looking forward to returning to Hollow Creek. After her grandmother's passing, the sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town, her childhood home, had become an unwelcome inheritance. Now, here she was, the sole heir, staring at the looming silhouette against the bruised orange sky. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, now seemed to crouch on the hill like a monstrous beast, its dark windows like empty sockets. With a deep breath, Sarah shouldered her duffel bag and trudged up the overgrown path. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled her nostrils. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from the cool evening air. As a child, she'd loved exploring the sprawling grounds, chasing fireflies in the twilight. Now, the shadows seemed to reach out, beckoning her closer, promising secrets only darkness could hold. Finally, she reached the porch, its once white paint now a faded gray. The heavy oak door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the cavernous hall beyond. Dust motes danced in the golden shafts of sunlight slanting through grime-coated windows. Cobwebs, undisturbed for years, stretched across the corners like ghostly fingers. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock in the distance. Sarah forced a smile, trying to shake off the oppressive feeling. Maybe it was just the long drive, she thought. Maybe the house just needed a good cleaning, but a glint of metal on the dusty floor caught her eye. Bending down, she picked up a tarnished silver locket, its surface etched with an intricate symbol she didn't recognize. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. It felt significant, yet eerily out of place. Pushing the locket into her pocket, Sarah ventured deeper into the house. Memories flickered at the edges of her mind, childhood laughter echoing through the halls, her grandmother's warm embrace. But a new layer of memory, hazy and unsettling, began to surface. A memory of whispers, hushed conversations about a darkness lurking at the heart of Hollow Creek, a darkness awakened by the full moon. Tonight was the full moon, and as Sarah glanced out the window, she saw it rising, a malevolent orb casting an eerie luminescence on the desolate town below. A cold dread wrapped around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. Something wasn't right in Hollow Creek, and Sarah had a sinking feeling she was just beginning to understand why. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Woods. The full moon hung heavy in the inky sky, its spectral glow casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty floorboards. Sarah gripped the tarnished locket in her pocket, its cool metal a grounding touch amidst the rising unease. The memory of the whispered warnings about the full moon felt more like a premonition now, a chilling weight pressing down on her chest. Sleep was a distant dream. The creaking floorboards, the unsettling moan of the wind rattling the old windows, all conspired to keep her on edge. Every rustle in the shadows sent a tremor down her spine. Finally, unable to tolerate the oppressive silence any longer, Sarah grabbed a rusty lantern hanging by the back door, its flickering flame offering a fragile sense of comfort. She ventured outside, the cool night air biting at her skin. The full moon bathed the world in an unsettling silver light, rendering the familiar woods behind the mansion alien and ominous. The towering pines, their branches gnarled and twisted, seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers, clawing at the moonlit sky. As Sarah stepped onto the overgrown path, a twig snapped beneath her foot, the sound echoing through the stillness like a gunshot. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the undergrowth caught her eye. Heart hammering against her ribs, Sarah raised the lantern, its weak beam cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Or was it? Doubt gnawed at her. Pushing onward, she followed the path deeper into the woods. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primordial smell that sent shivers down her spine. The silence was punctuated only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Just as Sarah was about to turn back, a disembodied voice cut through the stillness. It was a woman's voice, raspy and low, speaking words she couldn't quite understand. The hair on her arms prickled, and a cold sweat slicked her back. "Beware the moon's hunger," the voice whispered, fading into the rustling leaves. Startled, Sarah spun around, lantern light frantically searching the darkness. There was no one there. Was it a figment of her imagination, fueled by the creepy atmosphere and lack of sleep? No. Deep down, a primal fear stirred. This was real. This town, this house, they held secrets, dark secrets that were slowly unraveling. As she continued her trek, she stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a lone figure, a tall man hunched over a crackling fire. Smoke rose in wispy tendrils, mingling with the moonlight. The man, cloaked in a heavy dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, looked up at the sound of her approach. His eyes, the only feature visible, gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Lost, are you?" he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. Despite the tremor in her voice, Sarah managed a shaky reply. I live at the old Miller place on the hill." The man's lips stretched into a thin smile, revealing a flash of chipped teeth. "Ah, the Millers. They've always been curious about things best left undisturbed." He gestured to the space opposite him. "Come, sit. Share the fire's warmth." Sarah hesitated. This man, with his unsettling presence and cryptic words, sent shivers down her spine. But something in his voice, a hint of weary understanding, made her stay. She sat on a fallen log, keeping a safe distance from the fire. "You felt it, haven't you?" the man continued, his gaze fixed on the flames. "The change in the air, the whispers in the wind. It's a powerful night, this full moon." Sarah swallowed hard. "You know about the warnings? About the darkness awakened by the moon?" The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Darkness, some might call it power, Miss Miller. Power that's been here long before you or your family set foot in Hollow Creek." He tossed another log onto the fire, sending a shower of sparks dancing into the night sky. "But power is a fickle thing. It can be a boon or a curse, depending on who wields it and how wisely." He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "There are things buried deep in this town's history, things best left forgotten. But sometimes curiosity has a price. Before Sarah could ask him to elaborate, the man rose abruptly. "You should head back now, Miss Miller. The night grows cold, and the woods are not safe for the unwary." With a final, enigmatic glance, he turned. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. Sarah watched the cloaked figure disappear into the moonlit woods, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. His cryptic words echoed in her mind, fueling the unsettling premonition that had taken root. Sleep remained elusive. The encounter in the woods had shattered the fragile sense of security she'd clung to. Dawn arrived, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Exhausted but determined, Sarah decided to delve into the mansion's dusty past. Maybe, just maybe, the answers she sought lay hidden within its walls. She started in the attic, a room she'd always avoided as a child. Cobwebs clung to the exposed beams, and a thick layer of dust coated everything. Pushing aside a heavy trunk, she discovered a collection of old photographs tucked away in a forgotten corner. The faded images revealed a younger version of her grandmother, her face etched with a seriousness Sarah hadn't known her to possess. But the most unsettling part was the company she kept. There were photographs of her grandmother with other townsfolk, their faces grim and resolute, gathered around an ancient stone structure deep within the woods. Another photo depicted a strange ritual figures clad in white robes chanting around a bonfire, their faces obscured by shadows. A cold dread washed over Sarah. Her grandmother, the woman she'd known for her gentle nature and warm cookies, seemed to have been involved in something far darker. The morning light filtering through the dusty attic window seemed to dim as Sarah clutched the photo album. A sudden wave of nausea swept over her, followed by a dizzying sensation. Her vision blurred, and she found herself collapsing onto the dusty floor. As darkness consumed her, a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories flooded her mind. Memories of childhood nightmares, shadowy figures lurking at the edge of the woods, whispers carried on the night wind. Memories of her grandmother, her eyes filled with a strange fear as she cautioned a young Sarah to stay away from the full moon. The images were fleeting, terrifying, and as quickly as they came, they vanished. When Sarah awoke, the attic was bathed in the warm afternoon sun. Disoriented and shaken, she stumbled down the creaking stairs. The unsettling encounters, the disturbing dreams, it was all becoming too much. Maybe it was time to pack up and leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of Hollow Creek before it swallowed her whole. But as she stepped onto the porch, a chilling realization dawned on her. The townsfolk, once indifferent, now seemed actively hostile. Their gazes were filled with suspicion and a flicker of something like fear. Mrs. Henderson, the kindly old lady who lived next door, scurried past without a word, her face a mask of disapproval. Suddenly, the front door creaked open behind her. Sarah whirled around, heart pounding, to see Mr. Davies, the town grocer, standing on the threshold. His face, usually ruddy and cheerful, was now pale and drawn. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice tight with urgency. "This place, it holds no good for you. You need to leave." Before he hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around. Before he could finish, a voice boomed from across the street. It was the mayor, a stern-faced man she vaguely remembered from her childhood. "Mr. Davies, enough of your meddling. Let the girl be." The grocer flinched, but straightened his shoulders nonetheless. "She deserves to know, Henry," he retorted, his voice shaking slightly. "About the pact, about the price we pay." "A pact?" The word echoed in Sarah's mind, piecing together the fragments of her grandmother's past, the cryptic warnings from the woodsman, and the chilling whispers in the night. Just then, a guttural growl erupted from within the house. The mansion shuddered, a jolt that sent shivers down her spine. Sarah's eyes darted towards the boarded-up entrance at the back of the house. A hidden room? Curiosity, fueled by a growing desperation, warred with a primal sense of fear. Maybe leaving wasn't an option anymore. Maybe the truth, however terrifying, was the only way to break free from the darkness that seemed to be closing in. Chapter 4: Dance of the Damned. The guttural growl from within the house sent a jolt through Sarah, shattering the fragile standoff on the porch. The mayor's face contorted in a mixture of fear and fury. "Get back inside," he hissed at Mr. Davies, who cast a worried glance at Sarah before scurrying down the street. Sarah's mind raced. A hidden room? A pact? The cryptic words hung heavy in the air, fueling a desperate need for answers. Leaving suddenly seemed less appealing than confronting the truth, however terrifying it might be. Taking a deep breath, Sarah ignored the prickling of fear on her skin and stepped back inside the mansion. The silence that greeted her was thick and oppressive. Following the faint echo of the growl, she found herself at the back of the house before a dusty, boarded-up doorway. An inscription in a strange language, similar to the symbol on the locket, was carved above the boards. With a pounding heart, she grabbed a heavy crowbar from a nearby tool shed. The wood splintered with a groaning protest as she pried open the entrance. A stale, musty smell greeted her as she peered into the darkness. A hidden room. Hesitantly, lantern in hand, she stepped inside. The room was cramped and cluttered, filled with dusty artifacts, strange symbols carved into animal bones, ornately decorated masks, and robes woven from a coarse, unfamiliar fabric. A pungent smell, a mix of incense, and something decidedly foul, lingered in the air. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the corner caught her eye. A book, its leather cover worn and cracked, lay open on a rickety table. As Sarah approached, the firelight glinted off the pages, revealing detailed illustrations of the entity whispered about in the woods, a monstrous figure with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. But the most chilling part was the inscription beneath it, a blood pact, forged between the townsfolk and the entity generations ago. In exchange for prosperity and bountiful harvests, they offered a sacrifice every full moon. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a legend. It was Hollow Creek's dark secret. And her family, it seemed, was deeply entangled in it. A loud clang echoed through the house. Sarah whipped around, heart hammering against her ribs. The hidden passage had been discovered. The door creaked open, revealing the stern face of the mayor, his eyes burning with rage. "You shouldn't have come here, girl," he growled, a group of masked townsfolk now filling the doorway behind him. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. She stumbled back, the book clutched tightly in her hand. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows outside the window. It was the woodsman, Silas, his face etched with grim determination. "Leave her be, Henry," he rasped, his voice laced with a newfound authority. "The pact is a curse, not a blessing. It has taken too much from us already." The mayor scoffed. "Stay out of this, Silas. You've caused enough trouble with your talk of rebellion." The tension crackled in the air. Then, with a guttural roar, the entity's voice boomed through the house, a sound that shook the very foundations. The masked townsfolk flinched, their blind faith momentarily shaken. Spotting an opportunity, Sarah scrambled past them and bolted towards the back door. The roar intensified, accompanied by the pounding of heavy footsteps. She could hear shouts, curses, and the scraping of furniture being shoved aside. She burst out into the night, the full moon hanging low in the sky, casting grotesque shadows on the land. Behind her, the enraged mob of townsfolk emerged from the house, their masked faces twisted into expressions of fury. Sarah sprinted across the moonlit fields, her lungs burning, the pounding of her pursuers echoing behind her. Just as she stumbled, her legs giving way from exhaustion, a strong hand grasped her arm. It was Silas, his face grim but resolute. "This way," he rasped, pulling her into the protective darkness of the woods. The chase continued through the moonlit forest, the chilling sounds of the entity's rage and the townsfolk's shouts fading into the distance. With Silas as her unlikely ally, Sarah knew the fight for her life and the freedom of Hollow Creek had just begun. Chapter 5: Whispers in the Moonlight. Sarah stumbled through the dense undergrowth, her lungs burning and legs scraped raw. Beside her, Silas moved with the practiced ease of a man who knew these woods like the back of his hand. The echoing shouts of the mob and the guttural roars from the house had faded into the distance, replaced by the eerie symphony of the night forest rustling leaves, hooting owls, and the occasional snap of a twig under unseen paws. Despite the fleeting sense of safety, dread gnawed at Sarah. The image of the enraged townsfolk and the monstrous entity from the book burned into her mind. The full moon, a sickly yellow orb hanging low in the sky, cast an unsettling glow on their path, its light amplifying the unsettling shadows dancing amongst the trees. The woods, once familiar from childhood explorations, now seemed alien and menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of movement in the undergrowth sent shivers down her spine. Was it just the exhaustion or the entity toying with her sanity? The lines between reality and nightmare were beginning to blur. Silas finally stopped at a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. In the center stood a towering oak, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. "This is it," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "There's a hidden passage beneath this tree, leading to a forgotten chamber." A forgotten chamber. Sarah stared at the ancient oak, skepticism battling with a desperate hope. They had spent the past day holed up in a remote cabin deep within the woods, Silas sharing his knowledge of the pact and the entity. He spoke of generations of Hollow Creek residents, forced into servitude, sacrificing their loved ones under the full moon's cruel gaze. He also explained about the rituals mentioned in the stolen book rituals that potentially held the key to breaking the pact. But performing such rituals required reaching the heart of the entity's power, the forgotten chamber beneath the oak. Together, they cleared away a layer of fallen leaves and earth at the base of the tree, revealing a hidden trapdoor. The air emanating from the opening was stale and thick, carrying a faint whiff of something nauseating. Sarah hesitated, a primal fear gripping her heart. Silas, sensing her fear, squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "We have to do this, Sarah. For your family, for the town, and for ourselves." Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a worn rope Silas had procured and fastened one end around a sturdy branch overhead. Slowly, the trapdoor creaked open, revealing a dark and narrow passage plunging into the depths. The air grew colder, clinging to them like a damp shroud. The flickering light of Silas's lantern barely penetrated the suffocating darkness. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, a suffocating sensation that seemed to amplify the whispers echoing through the passage. Whispers in a language she didn't understand, yet carried a clear message: fear, hatred, and an insatiable hunger. The descent was long and arduous. Sarah's legs trembled with fatigue, and she fought the urge to succumb to the darkness, to let the whispers lull her into a false sense of security. Finally, they reached the bottom. Silas held up the lantern, revealing a vast chamber carved from the living rock. The walls were adorned with disturbing murals depicting the entity and its cruel demands. In the center of the chamber, a raised platform held a stone altar, stained dark with what Sarah hoped wasn't blood. As they stepped into the chamber, a sudden chill swept through the air, extinguishing the lantern's flame and plunging them into complete darkness. A deafening silence descended, broken only by Sarah's ragged breaths and frantic heartbeat. The entity was here, and it knew they were in its domain. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, clawing at her sanity, urging her to succumb to the darkness within. In this isolated chamber, with only the whispers and the entity's presence for company, Sarah knew the true fight for her sanity and the town's freedom had only just begun. Chapter 6. The Dark Heart of Hollow Creek. Panic clawed at Sarah's throat. The silence in the chamber was suffocating, broken only by the frantic pounding of her heart. The extinguished lantern had plunged them into an abyss of darkness, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. Silas's presence offered a fragile comfort, but the feeling of unseen eyes watching their every move was chilling. Suddenly, a faint, sickly glow emanated from the altar, illuminating the horrifying scene before them. Bones, countless bones, bleached white and scattered across the floor, formed a grim testament to the generations who had fallen victim to the pact. A sickening stench of decay filled the air, a grim reminder of the entity's insatiable hunger. Sarah stumbled back, nausea rising in her throat. Silas, ever the pragmatist, fumbled for a flint and tinder he kept tucked away in his pouch. A spark flared, catching hold of a dry leaf and igniting a small flame. It was enough to cast grotesque shadows on the chamber walls, dancing across the disturbing murals depicting scenes of sacrifice and the entity's monstrous form. The entity. For the first time, Sarah saw it, not in the pages of a stolen book, but standing on the dais behind the altar. It was a creature of twisted limbs and grotesque flesh, its eyes burning with an unholy light. Its guttural growl reverberated through the chamber, vibrating in Sarah's very bones. Terror threatened to consume her, but a primal instinct for survival kicked in. She focused on the entity, on its presence, searching for any sign of weakness. As she did, a memory flickered at the edges of her mind, a repressed childhood fear. A memory of her grandmother, her face etched with a mixture of dread and determination, whispering a forgotten incantation. The memory jolted Sarah. The pact! It wasn't just some ancient agreement. It was a source of the town's prosperity. Hollow Creek's bountiful harvests, its seemingly idyllic existence. It was all built on the blood of the sacrificed and the entity's dark favor. And her family? A wave of guilt and anger washed over her. She now understood the cryptic warnings, the hidden room, her grandmother's anxious glances at the full moon. The Millers, it seemed, were not just passive participants in the pact. They were its key holders. Sarah's stomach churned with a mixture of disgust and a dawning comprehension. This wasn't just about breaking the entity's hold on the town. It was about confronting the dark legacy of her own bloodline. The entity might be a monstrous being, but it was the townsfolk and her ancestors who had built this altar, who had spilled innocent blood. Taking a deep breath, Sarah forced her gaze back to the entity. It seemed to sense the shift in her, the burgeoning defiance replacing the raw terror. With newfound resolve, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver locket, the one found in the dusty attic. As if recognizing the symbol etched on its surface, the entity recoiled with a hiss. The memory of the forgotten incantation surfaced again, clearer this time. It was a binding spell, a way to sever the pact. Sarah didn't know if it would work, but it was their only hope. Silas, sensing her plan, nodded grimly. He began gathering the scattered bones. Their purpose suddenly clear, they would fuel the incantation, offer a final sacrifice to appease the entity and break its hold. Fear remained, a cold knot in Sarah's stomach. but it was overshadowed by a burning determination. Here, in the dark heart of Hollow Creek, she would face her past, fight the entity, and break the curse that had plagued the town for generations. The battle lines were drawn, the stakes impossibly high. But Sarah, with Silas at her side and the power of a forgotten memory at her command, was ready to fight. Chapter 7. The Price of Power. The entity, its monstrous form, filling the chamber, hissed in fury. As Sarah clutched the silver locket, the symbol glowing faintly in the chamber's sickly light, a primal fear threatened to paralyze her. But the image of countless bones, the chilling reminder of past sacrifices, fueled her resolve. Silas, his face grim and determined. Each bone clicked against the cold stone, a morbid counterpoint to Sarah's pounding heart. With trembling hands, she repeated the forgotten incantation, the words heavy with an ancient power she barely understood. The air crackled with unseen energy. The entity thrashed, its monstrous form contorting in anger as the binding spell took hold. The chamber echoed with its screeching howls, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A deafening roar echoed from above, followed by the crash of splintering wood. The forgotten passage had collapsed, sealing them within the chamber. The entity, trapped with them, unleashed its full fury. A tremor of fear shook Sarah, but she gritted her teeth and continued the incantation. Through the shimmering walls of the chamber, she saw a horrifying sight: the townsfolk. Their eyes glazed over, their faces twisted into masks of rage, surged towards the mansion. The entity, it seemed, was using their blind devotion as a weapon. Panic threatened to consume her. How could they break the pact if the townsfolk themselves were now under the entity's control? Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but Silas's voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the chaos. "We fight back, Sarah. We fight for the town, even if they haven't realized it yet." He grabbed a ceremonial dagger from the altar, its blade gleaming in the faint light. Sarah followed suit, grabbing another weapon, a rusted iron poker leaning against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Together, they clambered up the rickety stairs leading out of the chamber, the forgotten incantation still echoing on Sarah's lips. As they emerged into the hidden passage, they were greeted by a scene of utter chaos. The townsfolk, transformed into mindless puppets of the entity, had breached the mansion, their faces contorted with rage. A fierce fight ensued. Sarah, fueled by a newfound strength, fought back against her own neighbors. Her childhood friends turned into mindless attackers. Silas, a whirlwind of fury and desperation, battled by her side. The battle spilled out of the hidden passage, engulfing the mansion's labyrinthine halls. The air crackled with the clash of weapons, the screams of the possessed townsfolk, and the entity's enraged howls echoing from the depths below. Finally, with a burst of white light and a deafening crack, the forgotten incantation reached its climax. Townsfolk recoiled, a look of confusion replacing the rage in their eyes. The mansion, however, shuddered violently, its ancient timbers groaning under the strain. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged breaths of Sarah and Silas. The entity's presence receded, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness. Exhausted but triumphant, Sarah and Silas watched as the townsfolk stumbled back, shaking their heads, bewildered and disoriented. The pact was broken, at least temporarily. But the victory came at a cost. The mansion, once a symbol of her family's legacy, now stood on the verge of collapse. The entity, though weakened, was not vanquished. And the townsfolk, grappling with fragmented memories and a horrifying truth, would face a long road of recovery. Stepping out into the pale dawn light, Sarah surveyed the scene. The battle might be over, but the true test was yet to come. The fight to rebuild the shattered trust, to heal the wounds inflicted by generations of darkness, had just begun. The weight of the past lay heavy on her shoulders, but Sarah, with Silas by her side, knew she wouldn't face it alone. Chapter 8. Beneath the Waning Moon. The waning moon cast an ethereal glow over the ruins of the Miller mansion. The air, thick with the smell of singed wood and dust, hung heavy with a sense of aftermath. Sarah watched, a leaden weight in her chest, as the townsfolk shuffled through the debris, their faces etched with confusion and a flicker of dawning horror. The battle was over, but victory felt hollow. The entity's influence seemed to have waned, its hold on the townsfolk broken for now. But the cost was high. The once majestic mansion, a symbol of both Sarah's family history and the town's prosperity, lay in smoldering ruins. The pact, while severed, had left an indelible mark on Hollow Creek, a legacy of fear, deceit, and sacrifice. Sarah herself bore the marks of the battle, not just the scrapes and bruises on her body, but the psychological scars etched deep within. The horrifying visions, the whispers in the dark, the chilling certainty of the entity's presence, these things would linger, a constant reminder of the darkness she had confronted. As the townsfolk began the daunting task of clearing the debris and rebuilding their lives, Sarah found solace in the grueling physical labor. Each shovelful of dirt, each fallen beam hauled away, felt like a step towards reclaiming the town from the entity's shadow. Silas, his face lined with weariness, but a spark of hope in his eyes, became her anchor in the storm. He too bore the weight of the past, generations of his family forced to comply with the pact. Together, they shouldered the responsibility of revealing the town's dark secret, a truth met with disbelief, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal. Days bled into weeks, the reconstruction effort a slow and arduous journey. The townsfolk, once united by the pact's deceptive prosperity, now grappled with mistrust and division. Sarah, an outsider thrust into the heart of their darkness, became an unwelcome symbol of the truth, a reminder of their collective guilt. One evening, as Sarah sat on the porch steps of the remaining fragment of the mansion, Silas joined her. They watched the waning moon, its pale light casting grotesque shadows on the land. A chill wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint, unsettling echo. "Do you think it's truly over?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Silas remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the moon. "The pact is broken," he finally said, his voice rough. "But darkness clings to these woods like a shroud. We can only hope we've weakened it enough." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. "It's up to us now, Sarah, to rebuild, to remember, and to ensure the truth is never forgotten." Sarah nodded, a steely resolve hardening within her. The fight for Hollow Creek might be over, but the battle against the darkness, the lingering echoes of the pact and the entity's influence, would be a constant struggle. As the last sliver of the moon dipped below the horizon, leaving the land in complete darkness, a single thought echoed in Sarah's mind. Beneath the surface, something still stirred. The entity might be vanquished, but the true test would come with the next full moon. Would Hollow Creek be strong enough to resist its lure, or would the darkness rise once more? The answer, like the moonlit shadows stretching long and menacing, remained shrouded in uncertainty.